Welcome to the Intelligence Amplifiers, podcast that celebrates the people who make the intelligence a collective superpower. In every episode, we uncover the stories of learning and development leaders who amplify knowledge, break down silos, and empower teams to thrive. These are the enablers of insight, the ones turning expertise into action and shaping the future of work by ensuring that the right knowledge reaches the right people at the right time. So, if you're ready to explore how the intelligence is amplified and shared across organizations, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome. So today we have Ciji Madey. Ciji and I met a while back when you were at Sonos, I believe, and then later on in ShipHawk. So welcome to today's episode.
Thanks, Marko. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Of course, and we'll catch up with Sonos, and I know we also slightly crossed paths at Airbnb. I think you left just before we started working there. But I wanted to start with your earlier career. I believe you started with Lucasfilm. That was one of your first L&D gigs, right?
Yes, I'm going to date myself. That was probably 20 years ago now, but. Yes, I started my career at Lucasfilm up in the Bay Area. At that time, it was still a privately owned company owned by George Lucas. And since then, it's been the last year I was there, actually, it was acquired by Disney. So saw a lot of change. But I was a part of a unique team there called the Studio Talent Group. And that's what we called ourselves. We were essentially the learning and training team for the entire organization. So people hear stories about George Lucas really valuing learning and creativity, and you really felt that within the organization. So a large part of our team provided continuing education for all the artists, and I'm using artists in a broad term, but visual effects artists and engineers and anyone that worked on their video games and films. So making sure that they had the latest tools, the latest skills, that they were able to do their jobs effectively. And then we also provided classes to help inspire them. So there was photography offered and sculpting and improvisation and anything to help tell the story better of these films that the team was working on. And my team provided other types of learning and skill building that happen within a company. So giving feedback, leadership development, manager training. So awesome. It was, I think it was unique for an organization to develop that much investment in learning. And I think it still is unique for companies to do that, but it was such a great experience to have early on in my career.
We talk to L&D folks at tech companies all the time, but Lucasfilm is definitely more on the creative side than in tech. And I actually had the privilege to go to the Skywalker Ranch once and ran
into. Oh, nice!
I ran into George in one of the homes. It doesn't look like an office, campus at all. And one of the things that kind of strike me is the culture, right? Like the culture is so about creativity. And so we talk about learning and training and education, but like you also kind of touched on the creative aspect. I know later on you kind of transition more into the tech world. How is it different or the same, like kind of sparking the creative aspect through L&D activities?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it was that the employee population at Lucasfilm, and I think still is, they still exist, they're just part of Disney now, is unique in that the visual effects artists do have a creative artistic side to them, but they're also very technical. So there's a lot of engineers at the organization, a lot of software engineers, and even the visual effects artists have to be technical in terms of the art that they're providing. So it was creative in a lot of ways. And then also there was, I think there is that tech side to it as well. But it definitely, because of George Lucas and the DNA of wanting to provide this experience to people who go see the films, right? To create this magic with storytelling, that creativity was just a part of the DNA, and making sure that the employees that were providing that experience also felt inspired in their day-to-day work. And I think a lot of times people don't value that connection or don't see that connection in terms of we ourselves need to feel inspired. We ourselves need to be motivated. And so that was the huge investment in learning and making sure that the people continued to hone their skill and hone their craft so they can tell these amazing stories. But yeah, it was a unique experience that I don't think I fully saw because I was so young in my career. But I've a piece that I took with me during that time at Lucasfilm that is core to my core to who I am right now in terms of how I partner with companies is this mindset around starting with the person you're designing for. So in the engine design, as an engineer or designer, it'd be starting with the user, right? But in the HR people space, it's this idea of human-centered design is the technical term, but it's that mindset of if we're designing something for an organization, for a person, like performance management, which is like a typical HR thing to do within a company, that to make sure that we really understand the problems that people have, their challenges, what's going really well, what's not going really well, and starting from having a really good grasp on that before trying to change something or before designing something new, and really designing for the person and their needs and their wants versus trying to push something onto a person because you read about it in a book or you did it at previous company, it worked really well, and now you want to do it at the new company you're at. So that mindset or a practice of human-centered design I learned when I was at Lucasfilm, and it started at Stanford Design School. Now it's the D School for folks who know that program. But we were able to take a couple classes there and really, I really honed that methodology that I don't start any project or consulting practice or even within companies, any new program without doing some of that initial discovery and really, really knowing, even if it's talking to 2 employees or 2 people, if it's something small you're trying to do, just making sure that you're really understanding what and who you're designing for before you do different.
That's pretty awesome. I had no idea about that, but I'm a huge fan of the D School. I've been, I did a couple of collaborations with them. So anyway, that's a whole other story. And I love this idea. We don't hear this a lot, but I love this idea of taking a page out of a totally different playbook, in this case, design thinking playbook, and then applying that to L&D space. Like I think there's a nugget of wisdom in there, which is that human-centered design that makes a lot of sense. And I love that approach to like thinking about L&D as a product, right? Like you're building a product and it's centered around the user.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and testing, and if you go through the different, you're probably familiar with it, Marko, but if you go through the different stages of design thinking, you're doing the same thing. So even testing and learning and experimenting, and you don't have to roll out these huge programs to an organization, but you can roll out something small and test it out, get feedback, and then make changes based on what you're learning, and then try something else. We can apply those same practices in the L&D HR space.
I love it. And so you had this amazing early career experience at Lucasfilm, one of the most amazing creative companies and organizations on the planet. And then you chose to go back to the grad school, right?
I did, yes. So during my last year at Lucasfilm, I think I mentioned it was acquired by Disney. So it was anyone who's been part of an acquisition, I think, knows just a lot of loss, a lot of change, and So I was just, I think I needed a reset and wanted to do something differently, take a break from the corporate world.
Mhm.
And I think in my head always wanted to go back to school and continue my education in some form. And there is this new program at Mills College up in the Bay Area. For those of you who don't know Mills, they're very grounded in education, especially in the Oakland public schools. So very well known for their education program. They had just a few years prior started their MBA program, so in their business school. So that was brand new. They had this really interesting dual degree where you would get your MBA and your master's in educational leadership, and you would take classes from both schools, which was a little bit controversial for anyone who works in education at the time. I think things have shifted, but nobody wants someone from the business world to come and put those practices in education because they're just two different worlds. So it was an interesting program, and being a young new employee, you start to learn about budgets, and you start to learn about strategy and just things that I was a psychology major in college, so I didn't have any sort of formal learning around that, but I wanted, I think, a better understanding of just those concepts and how they worked in the business world. So hence the MBA. And then, and then I love obviously learning and education, and that's what I do. That's what I did for my career. So it seemed like a really fun, interesting program. So
I like this. I like this thread that we have. So it's MBA and Masters in Education, like combining the two.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing some common thread in your early career, and then you went from that. I know you had a couple of minor stints, but you ended up at Airbnb, right? And to me, that's one of the in terms of L&D, one of the organizations that's been kind of like pushing the envelope of like rethinking learning and development completely. How was that? How did you end up there? What was your experience like?
Yeah. So my old boss from Lucasfilm, who headed up their OD and L&D program, went to Airbnb and became head of talent strategy there. And she is, I actually am still dear friends with her, and she has her own consulting business that I help her with some projects, which has been really fun. But she is very, very innovative, and I think she started a lot of that thinking around pushing. She's always sort of, what's the next thing, Andrea? And she did a lot of that seeding at Airbnb. And I joined, I was only there for a year. But my husband and I, when I took the role, my husband and I had already decided to move out of San Francisco. We had been there for almost 14 years, and he's from the East Coast and I grew up in LA, and we were just sort of ready for the next chapter of our lives, which was having kids and moving somewhere just totally different. So I told her we were moving down to Santa Barbara after a year, but it sounded fun. She had joined, Airbnb was in their high growth phase. So it sounded fun. And she was doing, like you said, doing a lot of interesting things. And we introduced this concept of human-centered design during that first year that I was there. And it seems very intuitive, right? You should be designing things for the people there, but often that's not how we design. So it was really fun and challenging to do some of that work early on there.
Yeah, and Airbnb is very design forward. We were one of the learning platforms. We still are there, and usually we get feedback how the UI is like really intuitive and all that. But at Airbnb, they ripped us apart. Their designers went in and they're like this. Like I was like, whoa, I wasn't ready for that. So their level of design is like a couple of notches.
It totally is, and because of what their product, right, is all about your experience. And their offices I don't know where they are now, but their offices at the time in San Francisco were just so beautiful and so well designed, and it was just
Yeah.
a joy just being there.
Yeah, yeah. And then and obviously you and I met when you were at Sonos, right? So another uh, innovative leading company. How was that? How did you end up there?
Yeah. So after we left SF, my husband and I did some traveling, and then we settled on Santa Barbara for a number of different reasons. But Sonos is actually surprisingly headquartered here. The founder was from Santa Barbara and started Sonos in Santa Barbara. I ended up there through a connection in San Francisco. I was interviewing for jobs and ended up at Sonos. And at the time, there was no remote work available, so there weren't a ton of options in Santa Barbara. But yeah, Sonos was, I'd say, it was later on in my career, but very formative. There was so much change that happened when I was at the company. I feel like I could write a book or an HBR case study or something for business schools. But I saw most any big challenge that a company goes through in their lifespan as a company probably happened at Sonos when I was there. And if anyone's a Sonos fan and is continuing to follow the company, they're continuing to go through more change. But I'm such a huge fan of the product, and it's have made some lifelong friends there and learned a ton about how organizations work, culture, what matters in culture, shifts in founders stepping down and other leaders stepping in, and how to people navigate through that. So a ton of learning. It was hard. I'm not going to lie at certain points, but it was a really great experience for sure.
Yeah, I remember you and I briefly talked about that, and you mentioned how the culture changed, and it was from founder-led sort of engineering product forward, and we talked a lot about the design and sort of like designing products and so on to a company that's much more market-oriented, sales-driven, outside leadership and so on. And how did you, from a learning and development point of view, how did you navigate the change? Like, what were some of the challenges that came up, and how did you go about them?
Yeah, I mean, you listed a lot of the challenges up front, right? It's a completely different way to lead a company. So I think I took again what I had learned, and I don't want to make it sound like human-centered design is the only thing I know, but just starting from when the founder stepped down and a different CEO stepped in who used to be head of sales. He had different, and the company also went public too. So going from this private company to a public organization where you have shareholders and people that you need to be accountable to, that shifts a lot as well with inside the organization. So I did a lot of work around culture building and really understanding. There was a lot of loss in terms of a founder that was so a part of everything everyone did at the organization. Really understanding what are the pieces of the culture that really matter, that are in Sonos's DNA, that are really helping Sonos succeed and people feel really good about, right? They're the things that we want to hold on to and we want to make sure we don't lose. And then understanding what are the things that are part of our culture that we want to shed, that aren't, that maybe we have wanted to let go for a while, but they're really hard to when you still have a founder of the company. So understanding all of those different facets and helping build new language and new values and behaviors for the company that people feel like that are coming from them, right? So we did a lot of interviews and talking to lots of different, when this change happened, talking to lots of different people throughout the organization, different roles, different levels, different experiences, to create a story or narrative about where the company had come from, where they are now, and where we're hoping to get to. And I think storytelling, again, thinking about my time at Lucasfilm, just narrative, people to that in a way that's different than like, okay, here's the 6 slides about our new behaviors, and I'm just going to share this with everyone, and everyone nods their head yes. Nothing actually happens or changes. But telling a story that's coming from the people who work there. And then obviously you have to do work after that about training and skill building and all that stuff to support people ongoing. But I think the initial work of taking the time to interview people, of talking with employees and building that shared language around new values and behaviors that resonate. I think that was really helpful and transformative in terms of taking the company to where it needed to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I love culture, right? And we usually say you're going to have a culture one way or another. It's either going to be by chance or by choice,
Totally.
right? And you had the privilege to work in these organizations that are known for a strong culture that's by choice, but by design,
Yep.
right? And so what I'm hearing here is sort of like this very sort of intentional approach to codifying what this culture looks like once the founder is gone, where it was sort of like it would rub off of the founding team. And it sounds like you did that through interviews, but then also kind of solidifying that culture within the population of the company. And so you mentioned creating a shared language. How does that manifest itself? How do you now take this? So you codify the culture through interviews. You create a shared language. How do you now disseminate that and kind of make it stick with the employees? What's the L&D kind of toolbox for that? I guess.
Yeah, easier said than done, right? So something we did so I think that's the hard part. It's once you have that, then okay, so now the change, like now the real work actually needs to happen. And part of our strategy, I guess, at the time is, I think L&D, there's a place for formal training, right? Where you get people together in a workshop, for example, and they learn the new behavior skill. And we're all familiar with that sort of traditional training and learning and development approach. There was that because I think that's important. And it's a way for people to connect and they feel like there's something tangible for them to hold on to, right? It still feels really good to receive that type of learning and development training experience. I think. And then there's the other part to it, which I think is where the real shift and change happens, which is actually in the day-to-day work. So we did a lot of strategy around pulling together leaders across the organization. So Sonos was, I'm sure still is, a very cross-functional organization. And many companies are right now. You can't just sit in your own team or department and try and get something done. You have to work across the organization. So getting together all of these leaders in partnership with people from a talent partner or someone from the L&D team, the people team, getting these leaders together regularly to really identify the things that we're going to shift and move the culture forward. So they could be like a meeting cadence, like how people are meeting, and maybe there's a new meeting that needs to happen across the organization. It could be additional skill building, like maybe people really need to build a skill around having more hard conversations with each other because maybe that wasn't happening as much as it should, and we need it to happen. So there was a lot of intention around these groups that we formed to make sure these leaders had connection, and also different levels throughout the company had connection with each other, where people were identifying, setting goals and goalposts of what needed to happen, and then coming back together to keep people accountable to ensure these new practices were working. And I think that's a part of it. Some stuff we would try, and then we would learn that, okay, it's actually not working. It's being in that sort of experimental approach, and then coming back together and trying something new. But that was, I think, inspiring for leaders because they felt seen and heard. And in these meetings is where real conversations happen about, it's really hard being a leader at this company right now. And even having a conversation around that with other leaders is a practice, right? Is an L&D, part of the L&D toolkit. And then going back and trying something new because you're learning from each other. So I think that was that work that we did, in addition, of course, to more like traditional workshops and supporting leaders with their offsites and things like that. That felt to me a turning point in the work we were doing.
Got it. Yeah. And I love how, well, so I heard a lot of design thinking again, a lot of this like iterative, like let's just throw it and see if it sticks, and kind of iterate from there. So I love that that mindset that you have, that you bring to L&D. And I also love how like the purpose wasn't training or onboarding or this and that, but the purpose was really the culture. It was like a powerful culture, and then these were just the tools that kind of like fed into that and supported it.
Totally, yeah. And I think the other piece to it that I still take with me, sort of something I learned from a couple of really smart and talented colleagues when I was at Sonos, is this idea of this concept called weekend language. I still use it. I still use that term because I love it, but it just putting things in simple and plain terms. So I think a lot of time when you're doing something really hard, like something abstract, like culture work, or anything sometimes in the HR space, I think feels very different than how we navigate in our day-to-day lives. And we use terms like, we all need to get aligned, and I'm going to follow up with you, and that's not how we are speaking to our kids or each other on the weekends. So just being really intentional about the language you're using when you're working on something hard like culture or performance management or some of these other topics. Sometimes we can use really big and flowery language in our emails or our PowerPoint decks. I use Google Slides, but whatever tool you use, and people don't really understand what you're saying or what you're trying to do, and then it makes it really difficult to move anything forward. So just being really direct and talking to someone how you would talk to them over coffee or on the weekend. So that there's the woman who headed up internal communications, who I'm still very good friends with. If I had this really important email I needed to send out, or some sort of brief I was giving to employees or the executive team, I would share it with her. And because of her role, she was obviously very skilled and talented in comms, but she would push it all aside and just say, Ciji, just tell me what you're trying to do. Just if we were just chatting, just explain it to me. And that really forced me, I think, to just be really thoughtful about language and making sure that I'm understanding what I'm trying to say. So people that are reading it do. So that way we can all be, rowing in the same direction, which is really critical for changes like, especially culture work.
Yeah. I love that term, the weekend language. I used to refer to that as kids English. And exactly. It made sense when my kids were smaller. Now they're teenagers and I can't understand anything they're talking about because they have their own language. So that does not apply anymore. So weekend language is much better than kids English as they grow up. I love that. And I remember when you and I kind of talked earlier, you mentioned one of the things that you were proud of at Sonos was kind of removing this facade of like this corporate, talk and persona that we show to each other, and kind of being more human, right? And that's that was a big contribution to culture.
Yes. Yeah. People. I think maybe most every company I've worked at, just, I guess because a lot of them have that creative. There's a thread throughout that. Yeah. Sure, they're more creative. That people want to be authentic. They want to be real. They don't want to be spoken to like your robots. So that's
Got it.
yeah.
Got it. And so you were at Sonos for a while, and then you ended up at ShipHawk, which is much smaller, but it was a fast-growing startup. I remember we spoke while you were there.
Yeah.
What did you see in that? What called you to kind of go from a larger organization to another rocket ship?
Yeah. Yeah. I think again, I was at Sonos for almost 6 years, and so I guess I was at that 6 year mark for me is when I am ready for something new. I was ready. I took a head of people job. I think I was ready for the next step in my career and wanted to work at a startup. So that company was at the time 100 people, which really small compared to everywhere else I had worked. And again, like wanting to understand different parts of an organization or how people work that I just never experienced before. So being part of I had done so much work with executive leadership teams, but I was always on the outside, right? I will join your weekly Tuesday meeting and share, give you an update and be all sweaty when I'm presenting to you. But I think I want to be a part of that team and that conversation. And then I'm such a people first leader. It's all about the people for me. And I think that is wanting to understand how those two things work together, being accountable to the actual results of a company, and then also wanting to design and experience an organization that's for the people that work there. Because at the end of the day, you don't have a company, right, without people. And so I, again, learned a ton, got to do things around benefits and being involved in really hard people decisions and performance management and things that I didn't have experience with before. And I got that experience there. So
Got it.
yeah, you are for 100 people, you're doing everything. You're wearing many different hats. You don't have the luxury of this whole team is working on benefits. It's like, no, that's me. And then this team is working on our engagement survey, and then no, that's me again. And so and I had one lovely person, Sarah, who worked for me, was very, very talented early in career young woman. But you're just really humbled by how much work goes into building a company. So kudos to all the founders out there who keep it going, because it truly is. It's a lot, and you have to be 200% dedicated.
Yeah. Speaking of which, and then you left ShipHawk to become a founder again.
I did.
And your own company. So what was that? What was that thought process like? What called you to kind of go from from a corporate to a startup to being a founder?
Yeah. Well, right now it's just me. So I don't have any people that I'm responsible for, but I think again, I had some important people in my life who I looked up to who had made that shift to being consultants and advisors. And so I was interested in that work and what they were doing. So there's just some opportunities for me to start to get my feet wet and do some part-time work. And then also I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old, and logistics with school and life with 2 kids, I felt like I was missing being in that full-time executive role. I felt like I was missing out on things I didn't want to miss out on that I hadn't felt before in my career. So it was a whole lifestyle shift, and also a blended with career as well. So here I am being on the outside, which has been really fun. I think because I was such an operator in my career, like roll up my sleeves, I never had a job where I was, maybe some people have this, I don't know, where you're just delegating all the work out to your teams. Like all the companies I've worked with, even if you're in a manager or leadership role, you're still doing the work. And I have fun doing that. And so I think having that operator experience, having been on teams, like having empathy and understanding what my clients are going through, like their day-to-day challenges. And my intention as a consultant or founder is to design solutions that they can actually use. I think sometimes, and I've worked with these consultants too. Marko, you're not one of these. I think you you get something right from a consultant, and you're like, I can't. You end up doing you redoing it, right? You're doing a lot of extra work. It's not something that you can actually implement and use day to day because that person has never been inside an organization. So I think that's always my intention. I can give my clients something they feel like, oh, I can actually go and use this right away. There's no extra work, which is, I want to be helpful. So it's been really fun and lots of more interesting problems to solve, which I'm always game for, especially right now. So
so going from being an operator and like learning all about L&D and shifting all these cultures of this, amazing organizations to kind of taking that wisdom and now being more an advisor and consultant to other organizations. And it sounds like a perfect sort of like leverage for where you're at. Like there's this concept from a second mountain, right? Like going from one mountain to the next, right? Like, so it sounds like you're in this like transition of like using your wisdom and kind of leaning into that more. So what is the vision for Birch, like, or your consultancy? What would be like an ideal engagement or client? Like, who do you seek to serve?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so. My background is in organizational development, which is essentially, sometimes I describe what I do as being a functional doctor, like understanding that everything within a company, it's all connected to each other, right? So sometimes leaders make decisions like, I'll just give a really basic one, not basic, but a popular one that leaders go to, which is we're gonna let go of people because we want to become more efficient, right? Or more lean. When the reality is, we could look at how we're making decisions and try and make it more efficient, and maybe we'll actually achieve our outcomes or results in a better way because we're looking at something that's happening day to day, like decision making. That will still remain the same, even though now we're 70 people versus 270, and the company still feels really slow and it's really hard to get stuff done. So I think I see Birch as connecting, I call it the what and the how, but making sure the what and the how are working really well together. So the what is the results, the outcomes you're trying to achieve, your mission, your goals, which every company needs in order to thrive and grow. And then the how is, how are we all working together to achieve those? How are decisions being made? Is one person in the company making all the decisions and we need to go through them and it's taking forever to get stuff done and it's really frustrating and inefficient? Or is there distributed decision making where people closest to the decision are able to make it really quickly and effectively, and we're able to get a lot of things done and have greater impact? How are we communicating with each other during meetings? Like, most meetings suck. So what do our meeting practices look like? How can we get better at having conversations when we're taking time out of our work day? So blending, again, I think there's the thread with the business and the education side, but blending in the how for companies and helping to support them in that. So yeah, I think engagements range. Some clients come to me with a really specific ask, like I want to redesign performance management is a really popular one. And then some some come with, we maybe had really low engagement scores on our engagement survey, or something's just not right within the culture, or we have a new leader, a new CEO or something, and we need to improve our culture. And so that is more abstract, like what's going on within the culture that we need to support and shift or change or identify in a way. But all this work, even if it's something very specific like performance management, I always approach it again with the design thinking lens. So having some sort of discovery phase where I'm gaining an understanding of, well, you wanted to redesign performance management, but why? Let's understand what is going on right now within the company, and how can we design something that meets your goals as an organization and also meets everybody within the people that are working there. So it's really good as well. And that's the sweet spot, I think.
Got it. Yeah, I remember when I was in Twitter, we would always, when we evaluate people, we would think about the, two axes. One was impact, like what's your impact as performance management, if you will. But the other one is how you went about that, right? So, and that's really speaking to the culture, right? And you kind of leaned on that a lot as well. Like, our meetings, do they suck? Are they productive? Like, how are people approaching? How engaged are they, and so forth. So, kind of that brought up that concept for me. That's super interesting. It seems like you, just a final question. It seems like you had this like pretty well-designed career path, right? Like awesome organizations, got to do amazing work, huge impact on their cultures. You brought to the table kind of like a twist to L&D with this design thinking approach. So if you were giving an advice to a younger self, what would that be?
Oh, wow. If I was giving advice to my younger self, I think it would be I think this is just who I am as a person. I'm an introvert. So I think just really not taking advantage, but just, people are I think we're all, especially if you're a part of a company, we're all more open than we think we are, even leaders, right? I think I wish that I would have put myself out there more, I guess, right? I think I did my job sort of within the confines of my role, but I think I wished I would have set up more like coffee chats and learned from a lot of there's so many incredible leaders and folks within the company that were a lot older than me and had a lot more experience, and that can be really intimidating to feel like I want to chat with this person. And maybe, I don't know, maybe younger kids are doing that these days, I don't know. But I think that's the advice I'd give to myself, to just put yourself out there, because people want to share what they know. People like talking about themselves, and most often than not, a leader will be like, yeah, of course, let's have, even if it's a 15-minute chat, but creating that, building your network, right? And building those relationships, maybe like outside of your team or the people that you're really comfortable with. Yeah, I think just saying to my younger self, don't be afraid, just put yourself out there and see what happens.
Got it. That's I love it. I can take some of that advice myself. So
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I should write that down now. I'm like, yeah, maybe I should do this more often right now. So
cool. Well, thank you, Ciji. Great to have you here. Thank you for sharing your story. Got a lot of nuggets out of that.
Yeah, it's always good to connect with you.
All right. Talk soon.
Thank you, Marko.
That's it for this episode of The Intelligence Amplifiers. If you like what you've heard, be sure to subscribe or follow so you don't miss out on the future episodes. And if you're interested in being a guest or have a question, check out the episode description for how to reach us. Also, don't forget to check out Plus+, platform that makes collective intelligence at scale possible. Find out more at plusplus.co. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep amplifying.